Hello, grade 3, 4s, and 5s. Welcome to music class, week 2 of our online learning for January. I thought we would just take a moment, do a little bit of a recap from last week. Hopefully everything went well. I didn't receive any emails or messages, which I believe you all have my email. You can contact me that way and I can check that regularly to see if there's any questions, but I didn't get any, so hopefully everything was clear. We had talked about the treble clef, sometimes referred as the G clef, because it wraps around the G line on the staff. And the staff was the 5 lines, which immediately create 4 spaces. And on that, we will continue to learn about how the notes rest and live inside those spaces or with those lines. And that's where we get the reading of music. So we had what we referred to last week as the top treble clef, and that's where we put the notes that are in the higher range, the brighter sounds. And today I want to introduce where we would place the darker, the deeper, the lower sounds. And that would be in the bass clef. Now what you might notice immediately is the bass clef is quite a easier clef to draw than the treble clef. It just starts with a small circle or a ball, and you just follow it up, go around, back to the bottom, and then it has 2 dots right behind it. Now, what you might want to do is what we talked about last week. Just take your finger and use your finger to draw around it. Then maybe use a pencil later, and then on top of that, maybe use a highlighter. And that will give you lots of practice to be able to do that. When you look at it, if you could imagine if you drew one on the other side going the other direction, which in fact doesn't exist as a bass clef, but it would actually look like a heart. So it kind of looks like half a heart with 2 dots right behind it. So that's the bass clef, and that's where we will place the notes that are the lower notes. There's many bass instruments that are specifically instruments that play those lower notes. We have the bass drum, which has that darker, deeper sound. We have the bass guitar. We have the bass part of a piano, and there's other instruments that are specifically geared more to play those lower notes. So they would use the bass clef a lot. There are instruments that only use the treble clef. Many instruments use both clefs, and then there's some instruments that are geared more towards the notes that would be found in the lower part of the musical range of notes. So this week, that's what we'll work on. In addition to that, I have also sent in your take-home package this bass clef worksheet. So as you can see, not unlike last week, you have some bass clefs to draw across the top, and then to fill in the boxes, and then finally to actually put them on a staff. Now, if you remember last week, we called the treble clef, could be referred to as a G clef because it wrapped around the second line of the staff where the treble clef would live. Mostly it's called the treble clef. The bass clef also has another name, rarely used, but it could be called the F clef, because if you look here on this bottom sheet that you have, if you go up from the bottom line, the 4th line up, it actually originates or wraps around that second from the top line, which for later reference points, we're going to work on this, but that would be called the F line. And so occasionally it'll be referred to as the F clef. But from here on forward, between any of our discussions in our music class, we call it the bass clef, and then we call this the treble clef. So that's really all we need to discuss as far as those today. I wanted to take a moment and maybe just do a little review with some of our notes. I just had a little cards here, and I thought if you wanted to take a piece of paper and number it down, and when I held this up, just simply write down on your paper to the best of your ability what this notation represents, okay? If you're having trouble spelling some of the words, that's okay, as long as it's understandable to you. I did not tell you that the bass clef is actually spelled B-A-S-S. It sounds as if it should be spelled B-A-S-E, but it's spelled bass, and that comes from the Italian word, which actually comes from the idea of low, deep waters. That's why we call it the bass clef, okay? So take a paper, number it from 1 to 10, And as I hold these up, just put beside them what you think they are, okay? I'll take a moment. We won't rush too much. But let's see if you remember what this is. If you don't want to write it out, you can actually holler it out. Of course, I won't be able to hear it, but holler it loud enough that somebody will be able to hear it somewhere, even if not in your house, the neighbor next door. If you can't remember the actual name of it, put the number of beats it's worth. So this should be your fourth answer. Remember, these are the same. They can come alone or often seen in pairs. Okay, I will go through that quickly with you. All right. So the first one we looked at was a treble clef. The next one we looked at was a bass clef. Now I hope I did not get these out of order on you. Quarter note, 1 beat. Dotted half note, 3 beats. Whole note, 4 beats. Half note, 2 beats. Eighth notes, they're worth half a beat. Eighth rest, quarter rest, half rest. Now, maybe you just hollered those out. Maybe you wrote them down. Just see how many. Give yourself a score and see how well you recognize those. We'd also talked a little bit about dynamics. And dynamics mean, refer to how the notes are played loud or soft. And we talked about P stands for the word piano, which means to play soft. And then we have the letter F, which is the word forte, or represents the word forte, which means to play loud. And the piano is actually called a pianoforte. That was the name of it, because when they had finally got to the point where they've evolved to the piano that you and I know today, it could play soft and loud. Prior to that, the instrument that looked like the piano, the clavichord or harpsichord, couldn't play soft and loud. So they were so excited once they got to the piano, as we know a piano, that they called it soft loud. And that's where that name came from, pianoforte. So hopefully those all seemed to make sense to you. Now, just one little thing that I wanted to do today that I thought might be interesting. When we're talking about note values, we talk about how many beats a note is worth. Well, one way to describe this, and I thought if I'm just going to move this down to look at my apple, that might be helpful to do this, is actually to take something that is whole. So that would be worth 4 beats. We could say that's a whole note. When I take my apple and I cut it in half, now I have half halves. Wholes together are worth 4 beats. When I take it apart, each one becomes a half. Or if we were to call it a half note, 2 beats. 2 beats here, 2 beats. Now suppose I take my half and I cut it again. I now have quarters. So a quarter plus a quarter. So now we have a total of still 4 beats if we put it all together. Take it apart, we have half. Take the half apart, we have a quarter. And we could go further still and take that quarter note and cut it in half. And that would be the equivalent if we were talking about our eighth notes. So we have eighth notes, 2 eighth notes equal 1 quarter. 2 quarter notes equal 1 half. And 2 half notes equal a whole. So that's one way that helps us better understand our note values. Hopefully that all made sense to you today. If you have any questions, remember, feel free to contact me through email. And I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.